Today's lesson is 13.6, Equivalent Fractions and Decimals. The objective for today is that I will understand how to use equivalent fractions and write fractions as decimals. First problem we're looking at says, 3/4 of the students in Mr. Brown's class have a younger brother or sister. How would you write 3/4 as a decimal? Well, what's really nice for us when it comes to fourths, I want you to think about money. So when I have things that are in fourths and I want to write it as a decimal, I have to come up with an equivalent fraction that either has a denominator of 10 or 100. Those are the ones we will always work with this year in 4th grade. So I need a new equivalent fraction that has a denominator of 10 or 100. I know that there is nothing that I can multiply times 4 to get to 10. So 4 times something does equal 100, and I want you to think about money. Okay, we've talked about this before. So 4 times 25, we think about a quarter. If I have 4 quarters, I have $1. And I take the decimal out of there, so 4 times 25 would be 100. So every time you see a 4 and we're being asked to write it as a decimal, then we want to multiply times 25. Again, multiplying times 25 doesn't need to be complicated. You need to think about quarters every time. So if I ask myself, how much money do I have when I have 3 quarters? The first thing I start to think is that I have 75 cents. Well, again, ignore your decimals for a minute, and we just write down 75. So I have 75 hundredths. Now, once I have 75 hundredths, I do know how to write that as a decimal, because I would write my 0, I'd write my decimal, and I'd write out 75 hundredths. I write the number just like it is written, and I write my 5 in the hundredths place because that's what I'm saying. The denominator tells me what place value my last digit needs to end up in. Looking at this, we can see another visual of what we're talking about. So if I have the number 3/12 and I'm asked to write it as a decimal, again, I know there's nothing that I can multiply times 12 in order to get to 10 or 100. But I know that in order to write a fraction as a decimal, I need my denominator to be 10 or 100. So sometimes, just like we've talked about before with fractions, sometimes I have to simplify and then find an equivalent fraction. Because really, I need it to be a 4 or a number that I can multiply and get to 10 or 100. But I know that I can do that with 4. So when I look at 3/12, I would simplify 3/12 by dividing both the top and the bottom by 3 to end up with 1/4. Well, now I know that I can actually multiply 1/4, both the top and the bottom, by 25, and then I can write it as a decimal. So 25 hundredths is written in word form as 25 hundredths and is written in decimal form as 25 hundredths. What you notice is each one of these forms, I say all of them exactly the same. The only thing that's different is how it is written. So that's what you have to pay attention to. Looking at the other part, it has 8/10 as a fraction in simplest form. Well, 8/10, if I'm listening to what I'm saying, I should be able to easily write it as a fraction. 8/10 would be an 8 over 10. But it wants me to simplify it. So I have to look at 8/10 and I simplify and make smaller fractions. Remember, if I simplify, I'm always dividing, but it has to be the same number that I divide on the top and the bottom. So I think to myself, what number goes into both 8 and 10? Well, if they're even, it means I can divide by 2. So I divide both the top and the bottom by 2. 8 divided by 2 gave me 4. 10 divided by 2 gave me 5. So 8/10 or 4/5 is equal to 8/10 right here as a decimal, and it's 4/5 in simplest form as a fraction. In your notes, you should have these glued in, ready to go for today's notes. We're going to use it to look at 3/5 equals blank tenths. Oops. So let's look at the first one. 3/5 is equal to blank tenths. So the first thing I need to do is find an equivalent fraction that is equal to having a denominator of 10. Whatever I do on the bottom, I have to do on the top. So I'm multiplying both the top and the bottom by 2. So this would be 6/10. So in your notes, we're drawing a visual. Remember, I could color in my tenths up here. So there's 6 of them. So 6/10 would be my decimal form, which is equal in fraction form to 3/5. They're equivalent. The next one I want you to try looking at would be, let's look at number 2. 2/4 equals, let's do this. 2/4 equals 50 over blank. Well, we just talked about whenever I see a 4 and I want to write it as a decimal, I have to multiply by 25. both the top and the bottom. So 2 times 25 would give me 50. So 4 times 25 would give me 100. So that would mean that on my chart, I would be coloring in 5 rows of my 10 squares to show that I have 50 hundredths. Again, written as a decimal would look like that. I'd like for you to give these ones a try, number 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, for number, I'll give you a hint on number 4. Just like the one we looked at in our visual, we have to simplify first. So we need to divide both the top and the bottom by 3 to give us a new fraction of 1/4. Then we need to multiply by something that's going to get us to 100, so I can actually write it as a decimal. Go ahead and see if you can do 3, 4, 5, and 6 in your notes.